Hey, it's Mark Ferguson with Invest for More, and I want to talk about how the real estate industry might be changing significantly for sellers, buyers, agents, and pretty much anybody involved. We could see open houses disappearing. We could see it becoming much, much harder to show houses, to sell houses. And I know this is all done because it's supposed to lower costs and make it cheaper for buyers. It will probably make it way, way more expensive for buyers and much harder for buyers to buy houses, which makes it worse for sellers, which makes it worse for agents, and basically makes it worse for everybody except the lawyers who are making the money from the lawsuits and will have to come up with all the paperwork to change all these rules across every single state. And that is if the Department of Justice and these lawsuits go through. Now, before I made a video about this and I didn't know how involved the government was in these decisions. We had some lawsuits from home buyers and home sellers against the National Association of Realtors and some other agencies. Well, it turns out the Department of Justice, the DOJ, has been kind of in the works on every single one of these lawsuits. They have to approve them because they're basically changing laws. And so they're saying, hey, you guys can have your lawsuits, you can come up with an idea, and we'll decide if it's okay or not, and then we'll change the laws and rules how we see fit. That's interesting to me because the states and governments have all come up with their own rules and regulations for real estate commissions, how they want business to be done, and then you have the federal government kind of swooping in and saying, nope, you're not doing it how you want anymore, we're deciding how it's done. And they've even tried to overrule courts and jury decisions in this as well, which we will show you. So it's very interesting, and basically what the Department of Justice wants to see happen is they want no buyer commissions listed on the MLS. This is a multiple listing service where agents list properties. They don't want anyone to see what the commissions are, if they're offering a commission on the MLS, and possibly anywhere at all. So usually when you sell a house, the seller will pay their listing broker, and they'll also pay a buyer's broker as well. That makes it easier because buyers usually don't have a ton of money to pay their broker or agent, and it just makes it easier. Now, one thing the Department of Justice also wants to be very clear is that we're not supposed to say the buyer's agent is free to the buyer, even though that money comes out of the seller proceeds and the buyer is not paying it. We're not supposed to say that, so hopefully I don't get in trouble for saying that just now. I am a broker, I am an agent, and I know a lot of people say, oh, I'm just making this video because I want to save my job. I'm mostly an investor, right? I sell flips, I buy flips, I sell rental properties, I sell rental properties. I've got a few agents in my office, most of them are investors too. So honestly, if I didn't end up paying any commissions, it would save me money. So this isn't coming from a personal work standpoint. It's coming from a logic and business standpoint and consumer standpoint for what is best for the industry. So overall, they want basically every time a buyer sees a house, they want that buyer to sign a buyer agent agreement with an agent. So if you go to an open house, you've got to have a buyer agency agreement signed with a broker who shows you that house, which could make, right, do open houses very tricky. There's a lot of questions there. What about for sale by owner houses that aren't listed? This lawsuit is also with the National Association of Realtors. Not every agent is a realtor. Most are, but not all of them. So what if it's a non-realtor? Are they still allowed to abide by their own rules? How does that work? That could be very tricky too. And the other thing they want to do is possibly not allow dual agency. I don't know that for sure. I've heard some rumblings of that. A lot of people say, hey, if I want to go see a house that's for sale, I'll just sign a buyer's agreement with the listing agent who's selling the house for the seller. Well, if they don't want to allow that, you can't do that. You got to find your own agent, have your agent go show it, and you've got to have an agreement with that agent. Basically, it's making things much, much, much more difficult, more cumbersome, and complicated than they are right now. And it will probably cost the buyers more money because they have to pay their agent out of pocket now if a seller won't pay them. And this is encouraging sellers not to pay buyers' agents with all the rule changes. It's also requiring buyers to use an agent when they might not have had to before, might have been able to use a listing agent, maybe save some money, maybe not, you never know. And it's also going to bring in a lot of questions about for sale by owners, non-realtors, all of that as well. And a lot of people have said, hey, this is good. This will weed out a bunch of agents. It'll make things, more complicated, harder. Agents will make less money. And so that will save buyers. And the thing is, with business, with the economy, with how money works, if there's less competition, prices go up. They don't go down. So if you have fewer agents, a more complicated process, it takes more time, that means the price will go up. Agents might start charging more money than they are now because there's fewer of them, there's less competition, and it's harder to do. Agents aren't out there making millions of dollars. A very small percentage are, but the average salary for an agent's like 50-some thousand. It's basically at or less than the median salary for every worker in the US. And many agents struggle, don't make any money, and those average numbers don't count all the costs they have that, a salaried worker wouldn't have, like driving their car, marketing, office fees, commission splits. There's all kinds of costs agents have. So if you make it harder, you make it more expensive, that means a lot of agents will quit, which means less competition, possibly more expensive services. Okay, I want to start off with the DOJ breaks silence to reject commission offers anywhere. So the DOJ has been behind these lawsuits the whole time. They've been encouraging them. They want the real estate industry to change. So here's their direct quote. "We believe offers of compensation should not be made anywhere, but certainly not on the MLS," said Jessica Leal, an attorney for the department, without commenting directly on the settlement agreement. So basically the MLS lists commissions right now. If it's 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%, whatever it is, that's the money the buyer's agent could make if they bring a buyer and the property closes. The buyer could also show the buyer's agent can also show their buyer 75 houses and never make any money at all. They only make money when the property closes. So now they don't want that to be listed anywhere at all. The listing agent and the seller probably could still offer a commission, but it can't be listed on the MLS for sure, or possibly anywhere else, which means maybe not on Zillow for sure, Realtor.com, any of those. Before, it was theorized that real estate agents could list it on their own personal site because they control that. And this says the DOJ might be saying, nope, you can't do that either, which seems like a pretty large breach of our freedoms. But again, that's another discussion. And so that could make it very, very difficult to know what's going on for your buyers. Pretend you're a buyer. You've signed an agreement with your buyer's agent. You've agreed to pay them whatever commission it is. If you find a house and the seller is not willing to pay that commission, that means the buyer has to pay it out of pocket. HUD, a national government agency that sells foreclosures, offers a 3% commission. They offer one to buyers. They offer their listing agents that. I used to be a HUD listing broker. So for example, I wonder if HUD's going to stop listing their commissions too. It wouldn't surprise me if the government said, hey, none of you can list your commissions anywhere, but HUD can. That's okay. They're with us. They're the part of the federal government. They can do whatever they want. They don't have to abide by their own rules. But anyway, we've seen that happen before. So 3% using HUD's number. Again, there's no fixed commissions. We see commissions all over the place. On a $500,000 house is... I know this is pretty easy math, but just so you can see it, $15,000. Now, obviously that's, $12,000 on $400,000, $9,000 on $300,000. That's the buyer having to pay that directly now. On top of, say, their other closing costs, which could be 3% of the loan of the property if they're getting a loan, inspection, appraisal, etc. How many buyers have that much extra money laying around? Now the thing is, okay, maybe the seller will still pay that commission. Maybe they won't. How is a buyer going to know that when these properties are listed and you can't list a commission anywhere? Their agents probably going to have to call every single agent directly, maybe text them and say, hey, are you offering a commission? What is it? And then that listing agent gets to decide, okay, have the talk with their seller if they're going to offer one or not. And then now you still have, right, the agent for the buyer saying, this property offers a commission, this one doesn't. You have to pay me $9,000, or on this one, you don't have to pay me anything. Who's going to have the bigger advantage? This is just going to make it probably even more incentivized for sellers to pay a commission, because the buyers know for sure they have to pay it themselves now because they're locked into a buyer agency agreement, which is required. So it's really going to make commissions even more important than they were before, which I don't think is the intent of that deal, but that's probably what's going to happen. Now we have some other stuff to look at here. This is very interesting as well. The power of our government is why I'm showing you this. DOJ says Rex deserves a do-over in Zillow NAR case. Let's skip to the bottom. This is the important stuff. How we got here. Rex, which is kind of like a real estate agency exchange thing. They aren't even in business anymore, but anyway. They sued Zillow and NAR because they said their property should be listed without commission in the same spot as MLS properties. So they had non-MLS properties they wanted to list for sale on Zillow. Zillow has two tabs. One says, this is for agents, this is for sale by owners, because they're two very different types of sales. And so Rex said that's not fair, they should all be listed together. Again, telling businesses how to do everything. But they failed to sway a Seattle jury in 2023, which prompted the brokers to request a new trial. In January, U.S. District Court Judge Thomas Zilli denied that request. The judge had previously ruled that antitrust claims were without merit, effectively removing NAR as a party to the case. The DOJ, which has a significant interest in preventing anti-competitive conduct in the real estate industry, weighed in with this new brief that says, basically, we'll go up here now. Here's the quote from the DOJ. In denying a new trial of the case between the real estate exchange and Zillow earlier this year, the judge took an incomplete approach that creates risk that associations like NAR could evade antitrust scrutiny with optional rules, the DOJ argued. The non-binding but important amicus curiae brief filed the DOJ recommended that the Ninth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals nullify the previous ruling in favor of Zillow and the National Association of Realtors and send the case back to district court for reconsideration. Basically, the DOJ says, hey, we know that we have different levels of government that are supposed to work separately, but we think the jury and the judge was wrong, and we know better than everybody, and that their decisions don't count. This is your federal government at work. Something else the DOJ did is they have been after NAR for a while. They had settled a case in 2020 where both sides agreed to make changes. They're both happy, and the DOJ said, hold on, we don't agree to that anymore. We're reopening this case, went to court, and were able to get it approved. They could reopen a case against NAR. So basically, you also have to realize if you come up to an agreement with the government, you settle a case with the government, they can come back and come after you again over and over again. You don't really ever get to settle with the government. They've got supreme power, and the judges, the courts, none of that really matters too much. So here's another one, Mike Dunphy Group. He's got some really good videos and blogs that goes over this. So basically, here are the two big differences. There are two significant changes in the real estate agents' business practices the DOJ is requiring as part of the settlement. The first change is that agents will be prohibited from offering the buyer's agents compensation in the MLS. We talked about that. The second change is that buyers will have to enter into a written buyer-broker agreement committing to an agent compensation before even viewing a property. We talked about that too, but just to give it very simple, basic information. And then, like I said, I've heard other rumors that they don't want there to be dual agency, which is also not legal in every state. Basically, dual agency means, or even being a transaction broker is what it's called kind of in Colorado. An agent possibly represents both sides, which you can't really do in a healthy manner, right? You've got to represent either one side or the other. Well, in Colorado, you have transaction brokers where an agent is working with both the buyer and seller, but they're not representing either one. They're just helping with the transaction, right? They're not giving advice to the seller. They're not giving advice to the buyer. They're not trying to negotiate price for either party, because obviously that's a conflict of interest. But Colorado does allow transaction brokers to work with both parties as long as they sign an agreement saying, hey, we're not giving advice to either one. Now, as a buyer or a seller, you kind of have to realize, hey, it's really hard for an agent to be completely objective to both sides. Is it smart to do that? Some people are okay with it, others aren't. I've done it before, but I'm also an agent broker who's very knowledgeable in the industry and knows how things work. If they want to eliminate that, which, like I said, not every state has that now, but think about open houses. If you want to go to an open house and you don't have a buyer's agent yet, it's listed for sale, you can't go see that open house before signing a buyer's agreement. And if you sign a buyer's agreement, you probably want your buyer's agent with you. So what is even the point of going to the open house? It gets tricky. Maybe you can go to the open house without your buyer agent there. Maybe that would be okay. But if you go to the open house without a buyer's agent, they can't let you in unless you sign one with a listing agent. But then if you sign with a listing agent, you're becoming a dual agents or a transaction, and maybe the listing agent doesn't want to do that, which I do not blame them at all. It's really a tricky situation doing that. So if you don't have a buyer's agency agreement signed, you can't just go look at an open house. If you're a neighbor wanting to see your neighbor's house for sale because you got friends who want to move in, you can't do it. They have to block you. The listing agent has to hire security guards to stand outside and check your buyer's agency agreement and ID like you're coming into a bar. If you don't have it, you're denied. So that will be interesting to see if open houses even exist anymore with this, because it really doesn't help anybody. Not that open houses are the only way to sell houses, but it's obviously beneficial in the freedom, a lot of people like to have. So that will be interesting. For sale by owner, right? If a house is for sale by owner, are buyers still required to have a buyer's agency signed? How does that work? Right? You're having different rules for that. And then the whole thing with realtors versus non-realtors we talked about before. Not all agents are realtors. So this agreement is through NAR and MLSs that go through NAR. Not every MLS is through NAR either. There's new companies popping up for MLSs that are not associated with NAR. How are they going to be included in this unless the DOJ comes about and says we're changing every single state law to look exactly the same, and we're writing in new laws, and every agent, whether you're part of NAR or not, has to abide by this? Sorry, states, you don't really have any freedom. The federal government is deciding how this is all going to work. So there's so many questions and answers, and it will be very tricky to see how all this works out. Like I said, in almost every industry, rental properties, hospitals, businesses, development, when the government comes in, they start making more rules, they start making it more complicated, they bring in all the lawyers, it adds costs to everything. If you add costs to everything, people aren't going to just stop making money in the industry and lose money. Those costs are going to be passed on to the consumer. The consumer is going to end up paying for all these complications, all these extra costs, which is going to make them not be able to afford as many houses, which means sellers will be hurt, buyers will be hurt, and real estate is the number one wealth builder in the United States for just about everybody. Which means it's going to hurt the American people because they won't be able to buy as many houses, they won't be able to build as much wealth. In the end, it might create more renters and help investors and landlords because there'll be more renters instead of homeowners, which could push rents up even higher. And if there's less demand for housing and that makes it trickier, there could be less building. If there's less building, there's less inventory, which means houses prices could go up even higher. This is what happens when you overregulate and go crazy in any industry. So we'll see what happens. Again, it's not settled for sure yet. This is just what they want to do, but we're getting close to the settlement date and close to these changes happening. Be very interesting to see how this works, the workarounds, the changes and new laws and all of that. If anybody has questions or comments, love to hear them. Like I said, I don't know for sure what's happening. I just know a lot of the stuff that was accused to agents before. I know I said that weird. Wasn't true in my case. We never had fixed commissions. We never had set commissions. In my case, MLS systems always allowed every agent to show properties, always allowed the buyers to see exactly what commissions were paid and different things. So I guess we'll see how this all works out. All right, thanks for watching. Let me know what you think. Of course, we'll have other videos of real estate, my flips, my rentals, tenant issues, the liquor store, the mini mart, the laundromats, all that coming up.